Thank you, Earl. Like you said, my name is Toy Beasley. I work for an agency called TASK, Treatment Alternatives for Safer Communities. I'm the reentry support coordinator statewide. And like you said, I'm also on the leadership team with the McLean County Fatherhood Coalition. I have the honor to introduce Mark Sanders. So Mark Sanders is an international speaker, behavioral health consultant whose presentations have not only reached thousands throughout the United States, but also have made a significant global impact. His groundbreaking publication, Recovery Management, played a critical role in shifting addiction treatment and recovery from acute care model to recovery-oriented systems of care. Mr. Sanders has a 30-year career as a university educator, having taught at the University of Chicago, the University of Loyola of Chicago, and Illinois State University Schools of Social Work. He is a co-founder of the Serenity Academy in Chicago, a program that sponsors recovery-oriented peer groups in local high schools. Other than that, I'd like to introduce Mark Sanders. Go ahead, Mark.
Toy, and thank you, everyone, and good morning. If you're joining us on the East Coast, you're already into the future. I should say to you, good afternoon. Looking forward to spending this time with you. So I promised a 95-year-old man that I would share this story with every group that I spoke with. So here's the story. About 4 years ago, I was flying in from Arizona to Chicago, where I live. And on the plane next to me was a man who had earned 6 Purple Hearts. And how do you earn a Purple Heart? I'm glad you asked. Bravery. He was a 95-year-old World War II veteran. In other words, for 3.5 hours on this flight, I'm sitting next to the bravest human being I ever met in my life. And at one point says, Mark, what do you do? I says, I'm a social worker. I give speeches. I talk to counselors, case managers, recovery specialists, clinical supervisors, people who help others for a living. And he told me to tell you, thank you for your service. Thank you so much for your service. Know that I know that the world cannot compensate you enough for the important work that you do. I read a book called Good to Great. And the author says you can tell what's most important to a society by its tallest buildings. You see, 100 years ago, the tallest buildings were churches. Today, the tallest buildings are Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. But the author says that no society is great just because you have tall buildings, Fortune 500 companies, and Fortune 100 companies. The society is great when you have great counselors and great case managers and great recovery coaches, people like you who help others for a living. So if you're sitting in a room near a mirror, I ask you to look at yourself in the mirror and repeat these words to yourself. This is your lucky day. You're looking at greatness. Take a moment, if you would, and just take a moment to claim that. It's an incredible story about this boy who played Park District football. And he was the 5th string running back on the football team. What are the chances that you're ever going to get in a football game as a 5th string running back? I'll answer my own question. If you're a 5th string running back on a football team, you would have an easier time finding a penny in the Sahara Desert than ever getting in a football game. If you're a 5th string running back on a football team, you'd be more likely to be struck by lightning 5 times in the same day and live. Your whole job as a 5th string running back on a football team is to watch grass grow on the football field. The boy's father died, and they held a funeral on a Friday. He walked in the locker the following Saturday morning and said, Coach, I want to play the whole game. And the coach did what you would have done, let him play the whole game. And the boy scored 5 touchdowns. The great Walter Payton never scored 5 touchdowns in a football game. And coach said, what got into your 5th string running back? He said, Coach, when my dad was alive, he was legally blind. So I figured that since he died and went to heaven, he could see me. I wanted him to be proud of me. And that's what children want where their fathers are concerned. And that's not always the case. I used to work with young men who didn't have contact with their fathers. Between the ages of 5 to 10 years old, they said, Mr. Sanders, can you find him? Please find him, please. Age 11, have you found him yet? Please find my father, please. Age 12, I think about him all the time. Age 13, I rarely think about him. Age 14, I wish he were dead. You see what happened? The idealistic yearning turned into anger and rage. And what I've learned in my work is once father hunger, and I'm defining father hunger as when the girl didn't get enough fathering, when it turns into anger and rage, the world has to pay for it. Lots of the young people who I work with who've been impacted by fatherlessness wind up using drugs in order to cope. That's our topic. Families, fathers, and substance use disorders. What can we do? The first thing I want to share with you as we go through the slides is that sometimes the story doesn't always end bad. Just by show of hands, are you familiar with Howard Stern? Raise your hand if you know who Howard Stern is. Some people think that Howard Stern is the best DJ on all of radio. He's lewd and lascivious, talks about sex constantly, but he's inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a DJ. He's never sung one song or played one instrument. He can hold people's attention for 4 hours. He was interviewed by David Letterman. And David Letterman said, "I heard, Howard, you have daddy issues." Howard Stern said, "I have daddy issues." Here's the story. When Howard Stern was a little boy, there was nothing he wanted more than to get his father's attention. His father would come home from work and would ignore Howard and sit in his favorite chair and just listen to the radio, which was in front of him. And Howard would sit next to his father trying to get his attention while his father would just sit straight ahead and listen to the radio. And as a little boy, Howard said, "If I could just get inside of that radio, if I could just get inside of that radio, I'd have my father's attention. And if I was really good while I was inside of that radio, I'd really have his attention." And my friends, he was really good. He's inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That one ended well. But he told David Letterman I still had residue. That what I didn't get from my father, what I'm calling father hunger, impacted his relationships. I also want to say, just early on, that while today's presentation focuses on the mother-child relationship, a father-child relationship, the mother-child relationship is extremely important. The research would say that children actually do better when they're deserted by their fathers when they do their mothers. So I want you to know that I know that. Yeah, one more story, then we'll go through our slides. There was a little girl who had polio. And doctors told her she'd never walk again. And her mother said, not only will you walk, you'll run. And that little girl became Wilma Rudolph, who won the 100-yard dash in the 1960 Olympics. She simply said, "I believe my mother. Mothers are important." Let's go deep into our discussion around fathers. We're going to begin with a discussion of what involved responsible fathers provide for their children. It turns out that when fathers are responsible, committed, and present, they even have an impact when the mother is pregnant in utero. Because if he's supportive of the mother, there's less stress on the mother, less fetal distress. And thus research says the babies are more likely to be born to term, with greater birth rate, less likely to die prematurely. Fathers can be nurturing. If we go back and look at our pictures where their children are concerned too, and that's important. And they provide affirmations. The woman whose photo you see on the screen, her name is Dr. Mae Jemison. And Dr. Mae Jemison was the first African-American woman to go to outer space. I used to work with her father, who had worked at an agency where I worked named United Charities of Chicago. Now it's called Metropolitan Family Services. He was a janitor at United Charities of Chicago. How did his daughter get to outer space? When she was a little girl, he encouraged her and he affirmed her. And he told his daughter, you can be anything you want in this lifetime. He scraped up some money and sent her on an airplane ride when she was young. She visualized her one day going to outer space. And it happened. Protection, security, and confidence. Turns out, I don't know about your clients. The teenage girls who I work with that were deserted by their fathers, they often date thugs, gang members, and tough guys, not feeling safe and protected in this world. And the teenage males that I work with, deserted by their fathers. This man made the stories the ones you work with. The ones I work with in Chicago carry weapons, guns, in order to feel safe. Confidence. When they toss them in the air and catch them, that contributes to confidence the children develop. Increased probability of healthy relationships. It turns out that a father's relationship with the children's mother can set the stage for future relationships as the children grow older. Attention, a decrease in financial insecurity. I've worked with clients who are Harvard material, Yale material, Princeton material. But rather than go to Harvard and Princeton and Yale, got a job at Walmart, right? And McDonald's, 2 part-time jobs. So they won't be broke like their mom after their dad left. The male perspective. I've worked with many women who weren't raised by their fathers, who want to know, why do men do such strange stuff? So give me an example. One of my clients told me that they was going to go to a formal dinner. So she was on a diet for 6 months to be able to fit in the right dress, right? Got her hair done, her nails done. The dress was like about $1,000. And 15 minutes before it was time to leave, her husband was sitting in a chair with his boxer shorts on, hair frazzled, eating some popcorn, watching a baseball game. She said, that's some weird stuff. Why do they do it? Turns out that lots of the clients I work with who were deserted by their father never had that male perspective at home. Decreased risk of sexual abuse. I will say more about this in a moment. But when the father is gone, predators know that he's gone. Increased probability of academic success. It turns out that when fathers attend PTA meetings, parent-teacher conferences, and he's involved, it helps academically. Let's take a moment to talk about, so our presentation is divided into 2 parts. First, we'll talk about the impact of fatherlessness on children, and then we'll talk about solutions, how we can be helpful. Turns out how he leaves really does matter. Larry King, the talk show host, was interviewing the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Larry King said to the daughters, I heard your dads loved you. How do you know your dads loved you? And Dr. King's daughter spoke first. And she says, my dad gave a speech called The Knock at Midnight, The Knock at Midnight. And he was, in the speech, he said he was willing to die so that I could play at Funtown, just like white children got to play at Funtown. I knew my daddy loved me. He was willing to die for me. And then Larry King turned to Malcolm X's daughter. He said, how do you know your dad loved you? And Malcolm X's daughter said, he'd come home from being on the road for long stretches. He'd give me a hug. He told me he loved me. And he would pour himself a cup of coffee. He'd blow on it and cool it off. And he'd look at me and say, I would put sugar in this coffee, but if you put the tip of your finger in the coffee, it'll get sweet. You're like brown sugar. She said, I know my daddy loved me. She was sitting in the front row of the Aragon Ballroom and watched their father get assassinated. Right? She developed post-traumatic stress disorder from what she witnessed. She started using drugs at an early age. Had a baby out of wedlock that she didn't take care of. He wound up a ward of the state. Does anyone know how Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz, died? The grandson who became a ward of the state, who was abandoned, was filled with rage. His grandmother set a lemon on him, and he set the house on fire. How a father leaves really does matter. There are 3 ways that fathers lead their children. Let us chat. Would you find the chat feature? Because what I want to ask you is, of the 3 ways that fathers lead their daughters, which of the 3 do you think has the greatest impact and how they lead their sons on their children? Is it death, divorce, or desertion? Which of the 3 negative impact on children? Oh, you all are hitting it on the head. That's right. You're right, Erica, and Nicole, and Ernestine, and Laura, and KS. You are absolutely correct. It's desertion. Here's the deal. If he dies, the child is less likely to internalize that, being because something is wrong with them. Now, divorce has an impact, especially on daughters. We're talking about substance use. There's a strong relationship between divorce and heavy substance use amongst daughters. Her mindset. You didn't just divorce my mother. You divorced me too. Which brings me to a point. Are you all sitting down? I'm about to say something that might shock a couple of you. Okay, you're sitting down. The best thing that ever happened to me was my parents' divorce. Because when they were married, it was so conflictual. I never saw him. He was gone all the time. In divorce, I spent every weekend with my father in divorce, ages 5 to 13. It was constant and predictable. We worked side by side. I got my father in divorce, right? So it's not divorce. It's Alice Miller said. It's desertion. Sometimes there can be a divorce and the father is still in your life. Other times there's divorce and there's desertion. Yeah, how do you explain that? I'm so unlovable. Maybe it's because my hair is not beautiful enough. Maybe it's because my jump shot is not good enough. That's why as Tupac says, I don't understand why my daddy don't love me anymore. Desertion. By the way, Alice Miller said that children can handle any trauma, the death of a father, divorce, right? Even desertion. But what they can't handle is the lack of opportunity to talk about it. That's the gift that we owe the children. It's a chance to talk about their feelings connected to the loss. Let's take a moment to talk about children of fathers with addictions. Hey, my friends, I'm speaking of me. Both of my grandfathers had died of alcoholism. My daddy smoked crack. You know, when you use drugs, they numb you. And what Dr. Brene Brown said is that we can't selectively numb. If alcohol and other drugs numb one thing, they can numb other things, including the love that you have for your children. See if you can translate what I'm about to share with you. Me and my siblings didn't get enough mothering because our mother didn't get enough fathering. That me and my siblings didn't get enough mothering because our mother didn't get enough father. And here's the story. My mother was her father's favorite child. He had 14 children, right? But he was the kind of alcoholic. You ever known somebody who drinks so heavy, you don't need a DSM to diagnose them. You can smell alcohol coming out of their pores. My grandfather drank alcohol so heavy, you could smell alcohol coming out of his pores. He was numb so much that he could not give my mother the love that she needed. So she became man crazy. And she put the men in her life over her children. When a father is in an active addiction, he can be there without really being there. There's a book that's called Invisible Daughters, where the father doesn't even see her. Is that making sense, where a parent could be there, but not really be there? And then the third point here, that if unaddressed, parental substance use disorders can impact children through their lifespan. Here's the story. My father died smoking crack cocaine, May 29, 1986. May 29, 1986, I was giving my first speech ever. There was a knock on the door. There, Mark Sanders here. There's an urgent phone call. Take it now. My mother was on the other end of the line, and she was crying hysterically. And she told me that my dad had just died in the closet at work. He was smoking the drug of his choice, cocaine. And as soon as my father died, my Uncle Isaac went in front of a judge one more time. And he pleaded on the court to put him in drug treatment instead of prison. And the judge said, "Why should we put you in treatment? You've been committing crimes since you were juvenile." Here's what my uncle said to the judge. He said, "Your Honor, my father died of alcoholism, who was my grandfather. He said, my brother just died smoking crack cocaine, my father. He said, Your Honor, I don't want to die, I want to live." And he said to the judge, he said, "Your Honor, every crime I ever committed can be explained by untreated addiction." He went into treatment. He was the first member of our family to go into treatment. We count 30 members of our family who are now in recovery. It started with one man. And he decided, I got a parent in recovery. So he reached out to my cousin Yvette, his daughter. He found her in public housing on the west side of Chicago. By the way, those of you who are not from Chicago, in Chicago, we call public housing the projects. He went into projects when he was in his own recovery, found his daughter, my cousin Yvette, and said, "You were the smartest little girl in the world. The only problem you had was you had a mother who was strung out on heroin and a father who was strung out on heroin. Please go to school." And I brought for you a picture. My cousin Yvette went back to school. She got a PhD. She's the only doctor in our family. She graduated. She wrote a book called Going from the Projects from Public Housing to a PhD. Look at this photo here. You see the young man in front of her, my cousin Yvette? You notice the physical resemblance? That's her son. That day, he got a bachelor's degree at the same university. Or his mother, my cousin, on the faculty with a PhD. What a glorious day. She said, "Mark, my brother's overdosed and died off of heroin. None of my sons have addictions. It skipped them." My point to you, it's never too late. My uncle became her hero in his recovery. He went back and found his daughter and affirmed her. Didn't always end like that, though. Marilyn Monroe was deserted by her father. At age 6, her mother says, "I can't raise her by myself." She put her in an orphanage. At age 7, while in the orphanage, Marilyn Monroe was sexually abused. She told the person who was running the orphanage that she was being sexually abused. That person physically abused her. By age 7, Marilyn Monroe was deserted by her father. sexually abused, orphaned by her mother, and physically abused. She developed an addiction. Ultimately, she overdosed and she died. All of her partners that she dated were older, looking for daddy through these partners. Let me tell you why Billie Holiday sings the blues. Fathers are important. I used to teach at the university that said fathers aren't that important. They had research to back it up. I said, did you talk to Billie Holiday about that? Did you talk to the 2.5 million men in prison about that? When I go to prison, that's all we talk about. Fatherlessness. When Billie Holiday's mother was pregnant with Billie Holiday, her father deserted the family. Now they got one income. Her mother worked in a brothel to take care of Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday was 10 years old. There was a raid on the brothel. Her mother was arrested. When the mother came back from jail, there was a grown man having sex with 10-year-old Billie Holiday in the brothel. They let him go, and they put her in solitary confinement for a year to silence her. She gets out of solitary confinement after being abused. She starts drinking alcohol, using heroin at an early age. Her addiction took her life. All of her relationships were men because of that early pain. Let's take a moment to talk about the impact of fatherlessness on daughters. There's a book that's called Whatever Happened to Daddy's Little Girl. You should get that book. Whatever Happened to Daddy's Little Girl tells the story of what happens to daughters deserted by their fathers. Many of them go through the search. There's a knock on the door. Is that my father coming to get me? The phone rings. Is that my dad calling for me? Right? They're walking to school, looking in cars driven by men, hoping that one of the men driving the car, their father, going to pull over and drive them to school. Question. Let us chat. Girls deserted by their father. At what age does the search end? Would you put that age in chat? When daughters are deserted by their fathers, when did they stop searching? Mary's saying never. Jean and Dorothy are saying never. They can be searching for a long time, but we have a solution to that. We're going to get to it in a moment. We have a solution to that. Samira said 16. Samira, I work with some girls that were deserted by their fathers, 16 years old, getting high every day to cope. I work with 40-year-olds, still struggling with it. All right. The book says that daughters deserted by their fathers, not always, but sometimes they go through a period of promiscuity. And it's not so much about sex, it's about magical thinking. If I sleep with all these people, maybe my father will hear about how desirable I am. And Danielle said when they find a boyfriend, oh, Danielle, but some problems can happen there. We'll talk about that in a moment too. Specifically, Danielle, choosing men who desert them just like their fathers. I've seen that a lot. Dating older partners. What's that about? Looking for daddy to these partners. Research says that daughters deserted by their fathers at 140 chance increase in having a baby as a teen. Her mindset, he doesn't love me, but I have a baby. My baby will never leave me. Daughters deserted by their fathers are 6 times more likely to be sexually abused, as I mentioned. Predators know when he's not around. There's a relationship between daughters being deserted by their fathers, right? And unhealthy relationship patterns in the future. Addiction. I can't count on people. Give me these drugs. Now, as you know, not every daughter deserted by their fathers wind up with bleak futures. Some of them wind up being quite successful. Matter of fact, I used to counsel women that had 7/8 of their life together, 7/8, 1/8 struggling relationships. And sometimes in therapy, we found out it came down to that original abandonment, which said, you're not lovable as my daughter. I'm gone. I'm out of here. Let's take a moment to talk about the impact of fatherlessness on sons. Some will develop what's called male depression. There's a book that's called I Don't Want to Talk About It. It's about male depression. You ought to get that book. Because the author says at the core of male depression is desertion by fathers, which leads to anger and rage and violence and heavy substance use to numb the pain. If I see him, I'll kill him. As a matter of fact, my friends, my job has been to counsel lots of young men who shoot others with guns. And the majority of them that I work with suffer from father hunger. It turns out that a risk factor for gang involvement in urban America and hate group affiliation in rural America is father hunger. Older guys know when you yearn for this attention from older men. So they take you in. Increased risk of involvement in the criminal justice system, the absence of rites of passages. By that we mean culturally prescribed rituals that each society determines are used to transition boys into men. Fathers and older men in villages would usually initiate young men. When that's not present, we have gang initiations and hate group initiations because young men will be initiated. Toxic masculinity, doing dangerous stuff in the name of being a man, and limited role models on what it means to be a whole man. This can be modeled for them by fathers who practice wholeness. I wish we had more time to discuss that. In fact, when we have a few minutes for questions, ask me about that, about how fathers can model wholeness from their sons. When this is not modeled, a boy goes up thinking, well, to be a man is to be a tough guy. Oh, but there's more to it than that. You have to be a thinker. Desertion of the next generation. Johnny's 16 years old. His girlfriend who's 16 years old is pregnant. He's happy. He even sneaks to go to Lamaze classes. He doesn't tell his boys he's going, but he goes to Lamaze classes. Now, he's about to see the ultrasound tomorrow. Is he hoping for a daughter or a son? Would you put your response in chat? Does he want a John Jr. or does he want a daughter? He wants a son. He wants to name him Junior. As the rapper Tupac Shakur said, so he can see a side of himself that was never shady. He's hoping for a Junior. Junior's born, and John cuts the umbilical cord. Have you ever cut an umbilical cord? I've done it twice. It's nothing like cutting an umbilical cord. I wish women after they deliver could cut their own umbilical cord just to see what that's like. John cuts the umbilical cord. Junior cries. John holds him. As soon as he hears Junior cry, he hands Junior back to the mother. I hear you, Amanda. I agree. And he said, I'm going to get some milk. Junior doesn't need any milk. The mom is going to nurse. He disappears for 35 years. You know what happened? When he heard Junior cry, it triggered something in him. Memories of when he was a little boy and his father deserted him. So he disappeared. We can sometimes see this happening across generations. When fathers desert their sons, they deny the son the opportunity to be introduced to a community of men where he can learn healthy bonding. I'm telling you, my parents' divorce was the best thing that ever happened to me. I worked with my father from age 5 to 13. I moved in with him at age 14. And we worked together with other men. We played basketball together with other men. I didn't have to join the gang. My father taught me how to bond with men in a healthy manner. Spiritual distress. I'm angry with God. I'm angry with that father because this father deserted me. By the way, Before we talk about what can help, let me just ask you yes or no in chat. Is what I'm talking about so far, is this making sense to you? If it is, would you put in chat what's the most important thing that we've talked about so far? So I know that you're getting something out of this. What's been important so far that we've talked about? You all saying this is important. Ernestine says it is, and Nathan says this is important, what we've talked about, making sense. All right. Thank you all for that. Okay. So now, what are your thoughts as to how we can be most helpful to children deserted by their father? Or their father might be chasing an addiction like Jay-Z's father was chasing an addiction, right? Like 50 Cent's father was chasing an addiction, like the Game's father was chasing an addiction. How can we be most helpful? Before I give you my list, I want to hear a little bit from you. See what we have here. Yeah, daughters are affected them same as sons, and there's some different ways in which they're impacted. You bet. Okay, here's my list. Just simply talk therapy, where you, the helper, do most of the listening, and the young person does most of the talking about the impact of like not having their father in their life. Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor, said the confession is good for the soul. Alice Miller said the children can handle any trauma. What they can't handle is not having the opportunity to talk about it. Grief work. Reading about successful adults who dealt with fatherlessness or father's addiction and still succeeded. I'm going to give you a short list. I journaled this about an hour ago. These people all have fathers who had active addictions. Ashley Judd, Jay-Z, Halle Berry, Eminem, President Barack Obama, President Bill Clinton, President Ronald Reagan, all had alcoholic fathers, right? Rapper Nicki Minaj, billionaire Rihanna. There's a ton of people. Actress Charlize Theron, I think her name is, right? What's the talk show host? Drew Barrymore, the actress, right? And they were all successful. And if you read about them, if young people read about them, they can come to learn how did they succeed. By allowing young folks deserted by their fathers to have to express their feelings about what it's like not to have them in their life. And then, of course, to normalize those feelings. Gestalt therapy, empty chair work. I haven't seen my father in 10 years. Pretend he's sitting in this chair right here. What would you say to him? Give him a piece of paper. If you can write a letter to your father, what would you say to him? Trauma work. Treating the coping mechanism. Lots of the young people that I work with deserted by their fathers are either cutters, depressed, or they smoke weed constantly. So we treat those. Once they're no longer numb because of the coping mechanisms, then they're willing to talk about the absence. Involvement in groups which provide a sense of belonging and community. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts. My father's brilliance. My daddy died smoking crack. He was the best father on the planet. When my mother left my father, he gave me a watch, a dog, and a membership to the Boys Club of America. I wish he realized so I can ask him why, but here's my hunch. He gave me the watch because I worked with him and he knew he was telling me that punctuality was important. He gave me a dog because he knew I was going to need love. And he gave me that membership because we all need to belong. Involvement of grandfathers and uncles so that the girl knows your daddy's gone, but there are men who can love you. Rally the extended family around the child. Continue family celebrations. Journaling. Do you know how many rappers have drug-addicted fathers who were absent? They do. These rappers, all of them. Jay-Z, 50 Cent, They pick up a pen and paper and they start journaling. It's like a diary. It happens to rhyme and they become rich. Journaling about the pain helps and mentoring helps. Activities increase confidence in sports. Remember when I said earlier that girls deserted by their fathers are 140 times more likely to have a baby as a teen? A friend of mine from high school has said this to me for 50 years. He would always whisper, "I've never seen a girl pregnant who ran cross country in high school." Have you? Sports build confidence and fulfill that need to belong, right? Affirmations. And then help her with the search. She's never seen them. She can go to her mother and ask, "Who was my father?" And go to her grandparents. "Tell me about him and who he was. I'm carrying his DNA. They say I look just like him. Who was he?" He can ask older siblings and aunts and uncles. She could get her hands on her mother's yearbook or her father's yearbook and read what people said about it. Today, Facebook offers a gift. I have my office manager whose mother died when she was 9 years old. She found her mother's high school friends on Facebook and asked those friends, "Tell me stories about my mother." You know, if anybody has something good to say about the father, it's the Godfather. "I'm carrying my father's DNA. I look like my father. Tell me stories about him. Who was he?" She might visit the father's family and come to gain a whole new family. She can look through photo albums. The son can look through photo albums. Mentoring helps. Then, of course, we want to provide support for single parents. It's a lot of stress being a single parent, right? And then we can coach fathers who are trying to get back in their children's lives on how to be dads. We sit with them individually or in groups. We ask them to examine the impact of how he was fathered and how that has the impact that has on him and his kids. Insight can be helpful. We can communicate that he's important. When the school calls, let me speak to the mother. When doctors call, let me speak to the mother. One of the messages that societies often send is that fathers are not that important. You and I said, "Oh no, you're important." Let him know that he doesn't have to be perfect. But there's a value in attending school meetings and going to your children's events, going to dinner together or lunch, and respecting your child's mother, and gradually becoming the on-call parent and listening to the children. You know what gang leaders have figured out? The way you bond with young men is kind of the way me and my father bonded when we walked to work together, side by side. The importance of walking side by side with your children as you reestablish this relationship. And keeping the lines of communication open, and taking your children to school, and taking them to work. I had a few sites that to what Earl is going to give you at the end. There's an organization you all are probably familiar with called the National Fatherhood Initiative. And they have these curriculums, even when fathers are behind bars, to help them become really effective parents, even when they're incarcerated. Then, of course, helping dads with reconciliation when they're trying to get back in their children's life. We meet with them. We work with them to assess the insight, get their insight into the pain that their children might be experiencing. If amends are in order, we can help him prepare those amends. To actually make those amends, they can rehearse with us and expect to be rejected. Your son doesn't trust you. Or when you left, he was 3, and now he's 15. He feels like he's the man of the house. You're going to have to grow on it. You're going to have to grow on it. And in so doing, move at your child's pace. And how important it is in the future to be consistent. This one is important. I used to be in a group with single fathers, and a lot of our processing is, okay, you're angry with the mother, right? So how are you going to make sure that that anger doesn't impact your relationship with the children? And then the value in groups of receiving support from other fathers. I know I used to sit in winter circle groups with men coming out of prison, and they would support each other. They share stories like, what's it like? The last time they saw their child was 4 and now they're 12. And they want to call them by their first name. How horrible that feels. And these other men would say, I get what you're saying. Me too. I feel the same way. Or I'm not working right now. My daughter's going to prom and I can't help her with anything. Me too. They need that support. Then a lot of what I've done in this lifetime, if fathers and older men in villages are the ones who historically taking their children through what we call rites of passages. In Chicago, we form those groups where we have these rituals. Men lead the groups with teenage boys, and women are leading the groups with adolescent girls, ultimately helping prepare them for like womanhood and manhood, where they're the absence of a parent. So let us pause, and we want to see who has a question or a comment. I'll say some words in closure before we end, but before that, I'll ultimately turn it back over to a question or a comment. Sometimes people are a little nervous to ask the first question. Who has the second question? Can they pose it in chat, or are they gonna mute themselves? Yeah, so Amanda, I'm reading what you said. You have a father trying to build a relationship with the son, and the father understands why a 15-year-old son does not want to see him. That's where we come in. But some of it, Amanda, is that he'd have to probably look at the relationship he had or didn't have with his own father, maybe some emotions that's blocking that, which is impacting his ability to see it with his son. That's where we come in. Okay, Mary, you asked the question. How can fathers model wholeness for their children? Okay, here we go. If you all have a pen, write this down if you would. There's a book that's called The King, the Warrior, the Lover, the Magician. It's called The King, the Warrior, the Lover, Magician, written by Robert Moore. Robert Moore was an anthropologist that traveled the world, asking people to tell him stories about men. And he found that all over the world, people tell stories about 4 types of men, if you jot this down. The king. The king is the man with power who blesses others. He uses his power, right, to help the tribe, the community as a whole, right? He doesn't abuse his power. He uses it to help the people. He sacrifices what he needs for the good of the whole. The second archetype is what's called the warrior. The warrior is the protector, the hunter, the man who brings home the food, the warrior. The third archetype is the lover. And the lover should not be mistaken for the sexual man. The lover is the vulnerable man, the man who can give his wife a hug, the man who could cry, the man who can hold his child's hand, the lover, the vulnerable man, the intimate man. And then the magician, the man who could pull a rabbit out of the hat. So there's a famine in the village, right? And the warrior can't bring home any food, but the magician disappears, negotiates with a rival tribe, and brings home the food. Each one of these archetypes has a shadow, a less mature version of the real archetype. The shadow of the king is the corrupt corporate leader, the corrupt dictator. The shadow of the warrior is the tough guy, the thug. The shadow of the lover is the pimp, the player, the womanizer, the serial affair guy. And the shadow of the magician is the con artist. Many young men in our society are only given permission to be the shadow of the warrior, the tough guy, the rageaholic. And Robert Moore said that all four of these archetypes, the king, the warrior, the lover, magician, lay within each man, each woman too. And we need to know when to lead with which. In other words, if you're at a funeral, you're not a thug, you're a lover. You cry, you hurt. They need models who have this wholeness. You have it. You model these four things. That's my response. Here's my last statement. I'll turn it over really quickly. You ever have a question for me?
Mark,
I promise
you
you
have
I'll
a
respond.
question.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready for it. Carla?
So,
Okay, yes, sorry,
Carla,
I was on
okay?
mute. Okay, so here's the issue that I have. I'm a home visitor,
Yes.
and so I've had a couple fathers who want to be involved with their kids, but they didn't have fathers to model for them.
Yes.
And so I always hand out the package, the fatherhood package that I've gotten, from Earl's team. And but getting them to commit, because usually they're saying things like, hey, I don't think this is right for me.
Yeah.
And as a woman speaking to young men,
Uh-huh.
they'll listen, but they don't act on it. And I want to see them be the best fathers possible.
Yeah.
But they obviously, didn't have
And I think it's
fathers
that
in their
hard.
lives.
I think it's
So, oh, go ahead. I'm listening.
Carla, I think it's that hard. And I think not everyone is going to get it. And I applaud the fact that in Illinois, and I was listening to Earl the other day, that they have 3 programs that are doing this work. And some fathers are going to get it. And they're going to see that it's not easy. And they're going to hear from other fathers in these group spaces, right? That, but we can do this if we do this together and learn from each other and support each other. And some are going to get it. Not all are going to get it. And then, so simultaneously, the question I raise is, what do we do for the children simultaneously? Here's how you reach me. If you're wondering why I have an AOL email address, it's because I still have abandonment issues. I suffer from, I can't even let go of AOL. So here's the story. I got work to do. Help me. So here's the story, and I'll turn it over. My mentor's mentor was dying and called my mentor and asked my mentor, would you fly from Florida to Kalamazoo, Michigan, sit near my bedside, help me write one more article before I die? My mentor got on the plane. He flew from Florida to Kalamazoo, Michigan. He's sitting at his mentor's bedside, says, I love you, but this is really strange. Why are you writing an article on your deathbed? You've already revolutionized our field through your pen. This is strange. Why are you writing this article on your deathbed? His mentor quoted that philosopher who said that each of us dies twice. He said, the first time you die, it's a physical death. They'll have a funeral for you. And the next time you die, it's the last time someone on earth speaks your name. Keep helping people. And there'll be people speaking your name for a long time. Thanks for all that you do.
Mark,
yes.
there's a question in the chat from Sarah
Yes.
Hernandez. Did you see it?
No, I didn't.
It says, how can we prepare a child, or what do we tell a child when her father has left?
And it's not that simple, and all of us can respond to this, but there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you, right? You're lovable, it's not your fault, right? Because what I found is this, what I didn't say is this. Not everybody suffers to the same degree when this happens. What I found is that what a child tells himself about why their father's not there, what they say to themselves can cause a little damage or a lot of damage. Like I had one client I work with, Toy. He said, you know what? It's not my fault my father left. He was a no good father like his father was a no good father. He didn't internalize it as being his fault. He didn't have that same outcome as young people I work with who said something must really be wrong with me. I must really be unlovable that he didn't want me. If it's addiction related, then we have some very child age appropriate ways to share that information. There's a book written years ago called My Daddy Has a Disease, My Daddy's an Alcoholic. It's a coloring book where these children learn how alcoholism as an illness, right? The problem that it causes. It's the addiction. It's not you. Nothing is wrong with it.
Thank you. Before everybody hop on, Constance is going to put a survey in there. If you guys want to take the survey while we finishing up our questions. But if anybody have any other questions, you're more welcome to put in the chat or unmute yourself. Quickly, I do have a question mark. And you know the work we do in this field every day, inside the institution, inside the community. There's a lot of guys and gals that has fathers that do real good inside the institution. But one of the things I found out that a lot of our men and women that are incarcerated or whether in drug and alcohol treatment center, they're not educated on how to utilize a support system. I truly believe that a lot of our people go back to their old people, places, and things because they don't know how to utilize a support system like AANA,
Right.
Celebrate Recovery Winter Circle. So what are some ideas can you share? Because the reason why I'm saying that, because one of the things I ask a lot of the guys is when we're in our support group sometime, I said, when you guys get out, you guys know how to get a job. You guys know how to find a place to stay. You know how to get your IDs and et cetera. And then I asked the questions that I said, do you know how to utilize a support system? And none of them raised their hand. Maybe one or two.
Well, one piece of it, of course, Toy, is that we as men often are robbed of a feeling vocabulary. Big boys cry. Put him down, you will spoil him. Man up. He's only 4, man up, right? So in the work that you do, you are in the position to teach men how to be vulnerable with other men and talk about that pain and that hurt and those feelings of inadequacy. And coming out of prison, getting a job where my pay is so low that I can't help my daughter with her prom dress. I wish I could, right? But a lot of the work that we did to help men be able to connect with other men and be vulnerable, we did in those rites of passage circles. And we had made sure that we had facilitators that had also gone through their own rites of passages, who experienced that vulnerability in that group process, who could then share it and teach it with others. So there are processes where this can happen, but it needs to be modeled by king, warrior, lover, magicians.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mark? You want to put them in the chat or?
Can I ask this group one question while they're there?
Yeah.
They can put a question in the chat. I want to know, based on our time together, what I learned over the years is not so much what I share, but more about the action you take. So what I'm curious to ask you all is, what's the one action you're going to take when webinar is over as a result of the time we spent together today? What will you do? One thing, no matter how big or how small. What's your action? Will you let our conversation shrivel up on the shelf or like a raisin in the sun, or will you do something? What's your action? Amanda's going to encourage her clients to write letters to their son. That's right, Amanda. That's a valuable thing. Some girls have never gotten a letter from their father. And in that letter, Amanda said, don't ask them for anything. Just let them know that you love them and who they are. That's what my Uncle Elijah did for his daughter. This is who you are. Melissa's going to share the information in parenting and support groups. Anyone else? Amy's going to share with Jennifer's going to have a talk with her father. My sisters so adore their dad. That's the one place where Facebook is great. They post on his birthday. Yeah, I think, is it Dorina? They do have to move to the child's pace. You know, a father say has been incarcerated away for a decade. He wants to come in and lay down the law. He needs to grow, he needs to ease in on them and get support from others trying to do the same thing.
We have a question, Mark. So what is the, Mark,
And
what
Nathan,
is
you know,
the issue?
vulnerability begets vulnerability, Nathan. So if I can model it, vulnerability myself, it becomes more easy for the men around me to do the same. Yeah, and Tarina, you're right. That once you're back in their life, it's important to be consistent. And Carl is going to encourage the fathers to continue to reach out to the Fatherhood Coalition. It's not easy being a father. It doesn't come with instructions. As a matter of fact, Carla, even if you're okay at it, my brother wrote the other day, posting on my grandfather, when we couldn't stay with our mom any longer, we moved in with our grandparents. For years, we called that our grandmother's house. My grandfather paid every bill. We saw him got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we called it our grandmother's house. Yeah, man, the more facilitator trainings.
Mark, I think you missed this one. You might have, this says, what is the issue with a woman? And I think you talked about this some. What is the issue of woman dating or marrying someone 15 plus years older? If it is a man who loves them, why do they need to be loved?
Now, how they come up with 15 years?
They
They didn't say 16, 12, 13, 31 yet. I don't have a problem with it. As a matter of fact, as you all know, even at the age of high school, that girls out mature boys anyway, right? What I'm talking about, whoever raised the question, is sometimes what young women will do is look for their father through a relationship with someone older. That's what I'm talking about. And then after a period of time, they're not going to want to be parented by that person. They're going to want to have an equal relationship as opposed to, you're my father, I'm your daughter. As a matter of fact, older men who sex traffic younger women, what do they want them to call them? Daddy. So there's nothing wrong with it, but the challenge is that if you're in this relationship because you need to be fathered by this person, there's the problem, as opposed to we're in this equal relationship. Yeah, so someone wrote to most of my clients, Amanda said, child welfare cases. I tell you what, if a father never enters a child's life, get him a mentor. It's not a father. The research says it really helps. Call that uncle. The positive uncle. The one who's living a healthy life. Did you know your nephew, your niece needs you to be in their life?
Anybody else have any other questions?
You know, Toy and Constant, Earl and Dorothy, for the last 4 years, I have been on Zoom. And this is the first time in 4 years that people didn't just disappear. This subject right here is important to the people that with you all today. I haven't seen anything like this. It's important. And if you all, then you're going to do a really good job of communicating the importance of this. So my words to you all is once a week, I encourage all of you to walk through the world with your head held high. They're going to look at you with your head held high and they're going to say, look at her. She thinks she's God's gift to the world. He thinks he's a gift to the world. And you know what you are? You've been given the gift of empathy and compassion and the desire to help other people. And you are using those gifts to make the world a better place. So, Toy, if there are no more questions, I gave them a way to reach me if they ever want to chat with me. So, thank you
Well,
so much.
Earl, I'm gonna turn it back over to you to just thank everyone.
Yes, I want to thank you, Mark. This was outstanding.
Thank you.
Great, great information to help us. Highly motivational, highly motivational. We have 3 fatherhood coalitions in Illinois: McLean County, Winnebago County, and the west side of Chicago, 5 west side neighborhoods. We're constantly looking for new ways to organize communities and bring new fatherhood services to dads in our communities so that families and children can be strong. So good luck to everyone as you continue in the work of helping fathers. Fill out our exit survey. Many of our groups, we have some in person in Rockford and Chicago. We have a virtual group in Bloomington. We have a fatherhood skills workshop that's virtual. We're more than happy to open our resources to you. So you're welcome to stay on the line and complete the survey. And again, thank you so much for your attendance today.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank
No
you.
problem. Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.